Hello everyone and welcome to the Recitals in Depth. This discussion will bring you deep insights on the science and technology current affairs from the month of May. The broad themes which we are going to cover are: in the first one, we will be covering chemistry, from which we will gain insights on harmful chemicals that have entered into our diet and impacting our ecosystem. We will also read about the chemicals which, on the other hand, can be used as weapons of war. From the biology domain, we will read about various types of microorganisms and hormones and their impact on human health. And we will also make you learn how artificial intelligence can help us understand the biological structures. From the space domain, we have for you the processes that led to the birth of the stars, the supernova, and the universe. We will also read about some of the rocket launches and particle accelerators that can produce intense X-ray lights. So let's get started. Hello everyone, I hope you all are doing good and your preparation is going on well. Welcome to the part 2 of the Science and Technology discussion of Recitals in Depth. So in this discussion, we will read the other set of the topics featured in the May's current affair in the Science and Technology section. But before that, let us also tell you that the Recitals YouTube videos which got live from the April month's current affair, they have got a few success rate, especially from science and technology. So let us see how recitals have performed in the Prelims 2024. So do you know that one question was asked: which of the following is the exhaust pipe emission from the fuel cell electric vehicles powered by hydrogen? So we already covered in the April's recitals science and technology about the magnesium copper cupric oxide fuel cell, in which I have told you about the entire functioning of a fuel cell and how it deviates and how is it better from the hydrogen fuel cell. So basically I kind of provided you a comparative analysis between the magnesium copper fuel cell and the hydrogen fuel cell. So in light of that, I would like to tell that these are the options available, which is hydrogen peroxide, hydronium, oxygen and water vapor. To all those who have already attended these, this would be a very easy question for them. But anyway, the answer was D, that is water vapors. So the first question came directly from the discussion. Now, coming to the second question. Another very interesting question asked in the Prelims 2024 was about the perfluoroalkyl and perfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS. Do you remember that in the April month's recital discussion, we taught you something about the forever chemicals, that is the PFAS. This is the discussion screenshot, and in this we told you about all these particular options available. So, are PFAS found to be widespread in drinking water, food and food packaging material? We already told that they are almost omnipresent and forever chemicals, therefore very easily to bioaccumulate. So therefore first statement is correct. PFAS are not easily degraded in the environment. This is also correct. That is why they are forever in nature. Persistent exposure to PFAS can lead to bioaccumulation in animal bodies. Bioaccumulation. So the answer is all of the above. So you can straight away take 4 marks without any negative marking just by attending only one video. So that was a success rate of recital science and tech. So anyway, now let's start the discussion from the section 2, part 2 of the recitals science and tech discussion. Our first topic is about another ISRO's breakthrough, where they have for the first time tested something which we call as the semi-cryogenic engines. So till now, you know about the solid engines, the liquid engines and the cryogenic engines, but now we have tested something known as cryogenic engine. What is the utility of it? How is it created? And how is it different from a cryogenic engine? All of that we are going to read in this particular topic. But before that, one statement is very important from examination point of view. What is pre-burner ignition test associated with? In short, this is acronymized as the PETA test. So it can come that recently PETA tests have been in news. It is related to what? So it is related to the testing mechanism of the semi-cryogenic engines. What are engines used for? Engines are used for powering the launching vehicles especially that require so much energy that they will be able to put up an object in a very far off spaces, preferably not in the closer orbits like the low Earth orbit, but also in the geostationary orbits, which are very, very far off away, right? So the PETA test, as we have read, is about the testing of semi-cryogenic engines. And this has been recently successfully conducted by our ISRO. Now, the name of the cryogenic engine which we have developed is known as SCE. It is acronymized as the SCE 200, which is the full form of semi-cryogenic engine. What is the type of fuel required in it? So the type of fuel that we use in this is the liquid cryogenic fuel. When I am saying that something or some state of matter is existing in the cryogenic temperature, it means that it is existing in less than 150 degrees centigrade. So this is the nature of fuel that we are using, and therefore the engine name is SCE 200. Why 200 specifically? Because it is going to give me a power, or what I call a thrust, measured in kilonewtons. It is going to give me a thrust of 2000 kilonewtons. So this is the amount of power that I am going to get from this semi-cryogenic engine. Who is going to create this semi-cryogenic engine? Of course, the ISRO, but ISRO operates through various expert organizations. So this one is developed by Liquid Propulsion Systems Center. Now, can you tell me, where is this organization headquartered? Where is it located? So if I am saying that any kind of fuel, in fact, most of the fuels that are used by ISROs are created by an organization which is heavily specialized in chemistry, in chemical sciences, in aerodynamics. So therefore, Liquid Propulsion System Center, which is situated at two areas. So it has got two headquarters. One is situated at Thiruvananthapuram, also known as Trivandrum, and the second one is located in Bengaluru. Please remember, it is not located in the eastern part, but in the western part, both the headquarters, so that it becomes easy for you to remember. Now, though it was developed by the LPSC system, the LPSC center, but it was launched by Liquid Propulsion Complex, which is situated at Mahendragiri, not at Sriharikota. So it was launched by, this launching was done where? It was done in Mahendragiri, in the Mahendragiri complex of ISRO. Alright, now when I am saying that I need to test a new technology, which is a semi-cryogenic engine, what is the purpose behind it? I am already using a liquid hydrogen, I am already using liquid cryogenic engine. Then what is the need to shift towards semi-cryogenic? Because we want to fulfill some of the gaps, some of the loops that were there in the cryogenic, especially that it had a lot of emissions, it was very costly, very expensive. And in order to make something which is more cost effective, but at the same time providing me a thrust which is equivalent to 2 Vikas engines. Thrust is equivalent to 2 Vikas engines. Such a powerful engine at a cost effective price will be there with me with the help of semi-cryogenic engine. So the idea over here is, to give thrust to one of the most important, the most heavy lifter rocket launcher, which is the LVM3. What is an LVM3? So this is a new name. LVM3 is a new name given to GSLV Mark III. So GSLV Mark III is a launching vehicle which is able to deploy the satellites at the geostationary orbit. So first of all, it deploys where? At geostationary orbits or geosynchronous orbits. If I am deploying some satellite in this orbit, which means it has to be a communication satellite. I've already talked about these basics in the previous recital. Now, if I have to launch, let's say, an imagery satellite, then where do you think it should be deployed? In the geosynchronous, geostationary, or in the polar satellite? And which launching vehicle will ideally be used by it? So try to answer that question. Try to recall that information. Now, I have already told you that this is basically for the communication satellite. GSLV right now is the most reliable rocket in terms of heavy lifting. So if I want to deploy heavy weights then I will be choosing for GSLV Mark III, which is the most reliable one when it comes to lifting weight and successfully deploying them in the desired orbit. That is the reason why we have Chandrayaan 1, we have Chandrayaan 2, and now the Gaganyaan. They will be powered by GSLV Mark III only, which is now renamed as LVM3. I hope it is visible to you, and I hope this concept is clear to you. Now, in order to give it more power, we are going to deploy something which is a semi-cryogenic engine in it, and that is why it was developed. But not only that, we are entering into an era where we are trying to develop the next generation launching vehicles, where we are also trying to develop something which is reusable launching vehicles, so that we can avoid something which can lead to the Kessner syndrome. So I have already talked about the space debris that can be created by a lot of engines or a lot of launching vehicles, or the space components that we are putting in the space, right? Already discussed in the previous recital. So therefore, the reusable launching vehicles are the demand of the hour. In order to bring them into life, we would be requiring something which is known as semi-cryogenic engine. So I hope all of this concept is clear to you. Now, the knowledge transfer. So obviously, this kind of technology is not the birth child of India. It is definitely knowledge transfer from some other country. Very surprisingly, it is Ukraine. So it is from the Ukraine. We actually conducted a framework agreement with them. We concluded it in 2005. And by the Treaty of 2006, under the project Jasmine, the knowledge transfer for developing the semi-cryogenic engine came as a pact between India and Ukraine. So I hope now you understood where the knowledge transfer is coming from. Now, talking more about it, I have already told you that it has got eco-friendly propellants and it has got staged combustion. This is not of our use because this is little technical in nature. I've already taught you that this is going to be cost effective and this is going to be 15 times more reusable than the current launching vehicles. Okay. Now, the second point of curiosity in the discussion could be, what is the difference between a cryogenic engine, which we were anyway already using, and a semi-cryogenic engine? So let me put that forward. First of all, we have cryogenic engines on one hand, and then we have semi-cryogenic engines on the other hand. Let's try to distinguish them. So the first point of distinguishing comes from the fact, what is the fuel which is driving these engines? When something is operating at a cryogenic temperature, which means it is being operated at a very, very low temperature, below 150 degrees centigrade. This kind of fuel actually provides a lot of thrust because of high mass per input, and therefore, or you can call it as high energy per mass. This is going to provide me something which I call as thrust. Thrust is basically the power with which a rocket will be able to push the ground so that it can launch upwards. Mostly, this kind of thrust is required in a greater levels at the third stage of rocket launching. At the third stage. Why? Because, let's say in the first stage, you have already eloped the Earth's surface. Then you have the launching vehicle has plotted a particular satellite at, let's say, some orbit. And after that, I would be requiring it to go into another planetary object, or let's say some other extraterrestrial object, for example, moon. So I have to cover this long distance with the help of a very powerful engine. So therefore, as compared to stage 1, as compared to stage 2, the most amount of power is required in the third stage. And therefore, we would require something which can give us a lot of thrust. And therefore, what we go for? We go for a cryogenic engine or a cryogenic matter. When I'm saying cryogenic, what can actually operate at cryogenic levels? So this is anything which is basically gaseous in nature. So in the case of a typical cryogenic engine, we use something as a fuel and something which ignites us to the level of generating huge amount of heat. So this oxidizer is liquid oxygen and this fuel is liquid hydrogen, or basically just the hydrogen gas. The problem with cryogenic is that this fuel can only exist and can only be stored and compacted at very, very low temperature, because only then their molecules, they are typically gases, right? Is it possible to store them without liquefying them? No, because I'm liquefying them and that liquefaction can only happen at very, very low temperature. I'm storing them into something which I call as the cryogenic storage systems. Therefore, they are known as the cryogenic engines. Very, very costly to develop and very, very costly to manage and to store them. In order to have a better and more efficient and affordable cost-effective solution, I'm switching back to something which is known as semi-cryogenic engine. How to do that? Now let's say I have a fuel which is readily available and can already exist in liquid form. I do not need to convert, I do not need to liquefy it much, and therefore the cost of maintenance, the hassle of maintenance will drastically reduce. So I would be requiring a liquid fuel first. And second thing is I require an oxidizer. So in the case of oxidizer, I have again liquid oxygen with me, and in the case of fuel, I am resorting to kerosene. So the semi-cryogenic engine partially uses a gas and partially uses a liquid state of matter in the form of a fuel. Therefore, this is known as semi-cryogenic. Will the output be lesser as compared to cryogenic engine? No, it will be equivalent. It can even be better because the amount of emission from kerosene will be much higher. But at the same time, it will be providing me a cost-effective solution. Why? Because in order to manage, in order to create and liquefy the hydrogen gas, I would be requiring more intensive capital and machineries. This is not so the case with kerosene, which is easily extractable, easily available and easily storable, right? So this is the difference between a cryogenic and a semi-cryogenic engine. Semi-cryogenic engines are the next generation engine. You will be reading a lot about them in the upcoming months and in the upcoming years of the ISRO launches, because they'll be resorting to this type of engine. So please remember, this is more powerful than the current Vikas engine. This is going to be used in GSLV rocket launches, which we now call as the LVM modes, LVM series, LVM 3, 4, etc. that were to come. And the second one is that it will be required in the reusable engines also, the reusable launching vehicles also. Now talking about the launching vehicles now. If a launching vehicle, or basically, if I'm using an engine for defense purpose, if I'm using such a rocket for defense purpose, they work on the same principles of aerodynamics, then this is known as a missile. And if the same rocket is used for space purposes, for surveillance and civilian purposes, for peaceful purposes, then this is known as what? Then this is known as launching vehicle. So basically, it's just one thing with a different name and a different use. Now, coming to the evolution of the launching vehicles, a very important part. The knowledge about these launching vehicles are also important. It all started in 1980s. So 1980s when we got the first one, which is the small launching vehicle, the SLVs. These were the space launching vehicles which can only lift off a very light weight, lift off a weight of up to 40 kgs only. That was the payload mass. Payload is basically the amount of mass that can be carried successfully by a launching vehicle in a satellite. Here, the fuel that was used was all solid. So only solid motors were used. Then, of course, I can see that the payload mass is very, very less. So I will put in certain technologies in order to multiply this payload mass so that it can carry more. So therefore, multiplying it by 4, I got something which is the augmented SLV. Augmented SLV, which was having approximately the same height but could carry drastically large amount of payload mass. This is the augmented SLV, and this again carried a fuel which was comprising of all the solid motors. Next one is the PSLV, and a breakthrough that the Indian government brought through. The PSLV, or the Polar Satellite Launching Vehicle, are basically responsible for putting any satellites, especially the light-weighted satellites, onto the polar orbits. In the polar orbit, you can conduct the imagery activities, the surveillance activities, and therefore it was readily used, and this is the most reliable rocket of ISRO till date because of its success rate. Majority of the launches that ISRO makes is because of PSLVs, or is by the PSLV only. So this is also known as the workhorse of ISRO. Workhorse of ISRO. If I will very briefly tell you about the polar orbits and the geostationary orbit. So let's say that this is our Earth. I hope this diagram is visible. So let's say this is our Earth, and this is the equator. So can I now plot an equatorial plane? This is the equatorial plane. Now if a satellite is moving with zero inclination to the equatorial plane, which basically means it's overlapping with the equatorial plane, then in that case the satellite is known as a geostationary satellite. If it has attained a certain angle, a certain tilt or angle of inclination with this equatorial plane, let's say this is the orbit or this is the orbit with a certain angle of inclination, then in that case this is known as a geosynchronous orbit. When a satellite is deployed in geostationary and geosynchronous, it naturally becomes synchronized with the time period of the rotation of Earth, and that is why it is used in communication satellite. Because if a person at, let's say, time X, satellite is over here and person could see it from his roof. Person could see it from his rooftop at, let's say, time X. On the very second day or at any time, any point of the day, X plus 1 time, or let's say X plus X 100 time, or let's say X minus 1 time, at any point of time, this person will be able to see the exact satellite from wherever he is located. Why? Because the rotation of the satellite is synchronized with the rotation of this person, because the rotation of the Earth is same as that of the satellite, and that is why it is used in communication satellite for stabilizing the communication. But on the other hand, if this is the equatorial plane and satellite is orbiting perpendicular to this plane, then in that case this satellite is known as polar satellite, because now it is also known as sun synchronous, because now it is synchronized with sun, which means at every point of the time, let the satellite be here or here or here or here, irrespective of the location of the satellite, it will always see the light of the day, because it is synchronized with the revolution, with the time period of the sun with respect to Earth. And therefore this is used for imagery satellites which gets the sunlight and exposure to sunlight at all the time, so that it can very well view the objects of the Earth. So this is known as a polar satellite, and that was a geosynchronous one. So now coming back to PSLV. PSLV could now lift off a massive weight of up to 1800, in fact up to 2000 kgs of payload mass. Okay. In order to carry this much mass and in order to carry it to a very greater height, it involved a liquid fuel as well. So liquid oxygen was also used along with solid. So for the first time, liquid fuel was used in which? In the PSLV rocket systems. Now next comes the GSLV. If you distinguish between the polar orbits and the geostationary orbits, the distance of the Earth from the geostationary orbit is much more higher. In fact, this question was also asked in UPSC. What is the ideal distance? What is the typical distance between Earth's surface and the geostationary orbit? It is roughly about 35,000 kilometers. In order to cover this much distance, I require my launching vehicle to be much more powerful. How to give it that power? By giving it a larger thrust. How to give it a larger thrust? By employing a cryogenic engine. So for the first time, we started using solid, liquid and a cryogenic engine in the GSLVs. Now do you understand what is the requirement of deploying a cryogenic engine in GSLV? I hope it is clear to you. So first of all, we had a GSLV with just about 2500 kgs payload. Now we augmented the GSLV into the current GSLV, which is the Mark III, capable of carrying payload of up to 4000 kgs, having the same solid, liquid and cryogenic fuels. Okay, and the next generation will be having a semi-cryogenic fuel as well. Okay, so I hope all of this concept is clear to you in this particular discussion. What have we learned? We have learned that there is something which is called a semi-cryogenic engine, which has been successfully tested by ISRO. Where exactly it has been tested? In the Mahendragiri complex. It has though been created by the Liquid Propulsion Center which is located at two places. The first place is Thiruvananthapuram and the second place is Bangalore. We also learned the difference between the cryogenic engine and the semi-cryogenic engine, and what is the requirement of semi-cryogenic engines over the cryogenic ones. What exactly is this cryogenic word means, and then we also read about the evolution of the launching vehicles and how are they different from missiles. Okay. Now our next topic of discussion is a very interesting type of worm. Researchers have recently found that the Cener Habditis elegans worm, which for the sake of convenience we'll be calling as E-worms from now onwards in the discussion, they have got a very special ability of eating the disease-causing bacteria. But they don't just stop over there. Their children also have got a very strong inheritance pattern. Now this very simple form of life, I'll be teaching you about this, a very simple form of life has got such an important memory brain function that it can not only avoid the bacteria which can cause the disease by eating them up, but they also inherit it with the help of the RNA and DNA structures onto their offsprings. So this is something which we can utilize in the microbiological studies, especially in the era where a lot of epidemics can be threatening us. So now, talking about the elegans or the E-worm, you must know some few keywords about it. The first keyword is that it is a nematode. Nematode is any type of multicellular organism which has got a spiral or a duct-like shape or a thread-like shape. So for example, the worms that you see, this is also a kind of worm only, right? So all the worms come under the category of nematodes. The second characteristic is that they are very, very small in size. In fact, they are so small that their length, if we measure, is approximately of just 1 millimeters, comprising of roughly 1000 cells only. This is a very simple organism and very easy to be studied. Why? Because their body is of transparent in nature. So they are transparent in nature, and when I talk about their reproductive activities, their lifespan is also very short. So first of all, talking about the lifespan, it is of roughly 3 to 4 weeks. And in every third day, in every 3 to 4 days, their offsprings mature off also. So talking about the reproductive style, this has got a very unique reproductive style, and therefore they are known as hermaphrodites. Hermaphrodites are those class of organisms in which the male and the female reproductive organisms coexist, therefore facilitating easy and quicker reproduction. So they are hermaphrodites. We have already talked about their length, their size, how their body looks like, which classification they come into, and what is their reproductive nature. Now, this is not a virus, this is not a bacteria, this is a worm. But what we are seeing is that it can fight off a bacteria. Now, can you tell me about some other practices in which a bacteria can kill off the other bacteria? In very simple words, it is the antibiotics readily used in our medical fields. So, talking about the antibiotics, these are basically when the enzymes or when the cellular mechanisms of some particular microorganisms, preferably the bacteria, are taken, captured, and then they are utilized to kill off the other bacteria in the system in order to boost our immune system. So these are the antibiotics. Can you name few? So of course, for different targeted areas, we have got different antibiotics. We've got some for TB. We have got very basic like azithromycin that you could be using for your cough and cold situations. There would be clindamycin for acne. There could be penicillin notatum bacteria that can be antibiotic, which can be again used. So these are the antibiotic. Again, what is happening in this case? One bacteria is killing off another bacteria. And this is something which we ordinarily know. Now, do you know also about a special case in which a virus has become good enough to kill the other bacteria and keep the environment bacteria free? These kind of viruses are known as bacteriophages. It is very important and it has been asked by UPSC in its examination as well. If I talk about the name, phage means to eat, and something which eats the bacteria are called as bacteriophages. Basically, these are a class of viruses which are only known to be living or infecting the bacterial cells. So they cannot reside into any other living organism but the bacteria. So first of all, these are viruses. These are viruses which only resides in bacteria or in the bacterial body. And the second matter of the fact is that they infect the bacteria and they kill them off, which can be of a lot of usages. For example, you know why the Ganga water is considered to be so pure that it does not get contaminated, though currently it's not the situation because of the Ganga pollution, but it was known to be unadulterated water even if it lasted for 100 of years, stored in a stagnant places. Why? Because Ganga water intrinsically contains the bacteriophages. These kind of viruses are present in the water which are actually healthy in nature and they keep the water bacteria free. So these are the bacteriophages. Okay. Now, let's try to solve an associated PYQ with the existing information. So in the year 2022, UPSC asked you a question that consider the following. These are the microorganisms, bacteria, fungi and virus. Which of the following can be cultured in artificial or synthetic medium? There is one concept which I believe you must be knowing, but anyway I'm revising it for you. Bacteria and fungi, they can live by their own. They do not require basically organic medium to thrive in. But on the other cases, viruses are intrinsically dead organisms unless they come in contact with an organic structure or with an organelle. Okay, so only when, so let's say there could be a virus in the camera, there could be a virus in your table, but that is a dead virus. It is not going to infect you. But the moment it has come inside or it is going to contact, let's say a bacteria, fungi, or let's say a human cell, in that particular moment it will start thriving and replicating itself. Therefore, the case of the matter is, in the synthetic medium, in the artificial medium, viruses generally cannot be multiplied. So here the answer would be 1 and 2. Okay. Now in the next topic, we shall read about AlphaFold 3. AlphaFold 3 is one of the testaments where artificial intelligence can be used to understand the biology. AlphaFold 3 is the emerging technology which is developed by, as you can predict, it has got a prefix of alpha. Alpha, or which also stands for alphabet, that is a subsidiary of Google. So it has been created by two subsidiaries of Google. One is the DeepMind, Google's DeepMind, which is leveraging the artificial intelligence technology, and the second one is Isomorphic Labs. So both of them are coming together to develop the AlphaFold 3, which is used and which will have an unprecedented accuracy to guess, to understand and to reveal the complex molecules, for example, the protein molecules. And this is for the first time when an AI can actually predict the type, the shape and structure of the proteins. So talking about the proteins can vary in structure depending on the complexity of the amino acids. Why amino acid? See, we have got three very basic components in our body, or any organism for that matter. One is the protein, second is the carbohydrate, and third is the fat. These are the three things which are required for our survival, and this is basically which we get from the food. Now, talking about the carbohydrates, the most basic unit of carbohydrate, let's say if I talk about a matter, the most smallest unit of matter is known as an atom. So the most smallest unit of a carbohydrate is known as glucose. So if you will break down carbohydrate, you will eventually get glucose, which is the source of energy. Okay, now if you talk about the fats, fat can be decomposed into the last level, which is the fatty acids. And if you talk about the proteins, which are the building blocks of our body, very crucial for the growth and development, proteins build up from amino acids. So it is through the specific arrangement of the amino acid you will get what we call as the peptides. The peptides. You must have heard about peptides in ordinary languages, but peptides are nothing but the simplified protein molecules only, which can be easily digested and stored. Then they get further arranged into polypeptides, which further gets arranged into proteins. So what is the basic unit of protein? It is the amino acid. And how does an amino acid or a protein structure looks like? Let's have a look. So ideally, it comprises of any protein group, any amino acid would comprise of two things. One is amine, and second is an acid. The acid that it comprises of is known as the carboxyl acid, which is the COOH arranged as like this. The second thing is amine group. So how will a typical protein group looks like? It will look like a carbon which is combined with carboxyl group and which is combined with amino acid. This is how an amino acid or a protein looks like, because protein is a polymer. Polymer, which means that a lot of chains of amino acids are created, which leads to a 3D structure, which is known as protein. And protein can vary in their structures, which can now be identified with unprecedented accuracy with the help of an AI technology, which is AlphaFold 3. Naturally, you can see a suffix of 3 in the place, which means that they already experimented with AlphaFold 1 and AlphaFold 2. What is the difference between this new technology, and how is it better than the AlphaFold 1 and 3? Because AlphaFold 3 is not just able of predicting protein structure, but also of other biocellular constituents. For example, DNA. For example, RNA. So it can also, and for example, other organisms, for example, other biological structures like, ligands. So please understand, this question can be asked, and AlphaFold 3 is used to predict protein only, DNA only, RNA only, but it is for all of them and even beyond. Okay, so it's a very high-tech technology which is utilizing the AI technology for the benefit of what we call as the biological structure discovery. Now, which kind of technology is going to be used by this AlphaFold 3? Which particular AI technology? This technology is known as the deep learning tech. So deep learning technology is the most advanced form of AI technology that we are seeing right now. If I distinguish it into three parts, initially we came up with artificial intelligence. Who is the father of artificial intelligence? It is said that Alan Turing was the father of artificial intelligence, and John McCarthy was the first person to use the term of artificial intelligence, because this is the one where the machine can mimic the cognitive intelligence of human beings. Now, We then moved on to making machines learn a lot, and this we know as the machine learning, where the machine, by learning through the examples given by human, can now produce a lot of actions, can now perform a lot of tasks. Of course, it is heavily monitored by humans. But one another leverage over this technology is the deep learning, where a machine has learned so well that it is not only able to recognize the data, process the data, take actions, but also learn from its own action itself, create a feedback mechanism and improve again. So let's say, for example, you want to have a self-driving car. The self-driving car will need to learn a lot of permutation and combination in order to safely drive you through from place 1 to place 3. And that is why we utilize deep learning in such technologies. In very simple terms, you have voice recognition software tools, you have got your Apple iPhone or maybe the other phones in which the face recognition is there. That is all because of deep learning technology. So deep learning actually learns through the data set, processes the data set, removes the problems with that particular data set, and approves a different kind of action, chooses among these actions, and then picks up one action and puts a feedback into the system again in order to improve its further process. This is the idea of deep learning technology. I hope it is clear to you. Now, as the world is fast forwardly moving towards a convergence between the particle physics and the space physics, we are eventually trying to develop the particles. Particles, for example, the Higgs boson, the God particle, and also some of the energy particles which were there in the early universe in order to unleash the mysteries of universe. And in order to create such a high energy source, which is known as high energy proton source, a lot of experiments are getting conducted. We have already discussed about the CERN experiment getting conducted near to Switzerland. But for the first time, a country of Asia has now developed an equivalent high energy photon source, which is going to produce nothing but a very high energy X-rays. X-rays similar to that which can be produced by some of the highest energy particles or spatial bodies across the universe. For example, your magnetas, your black holes, the supernovas, etc. So in order to understand the mystery of this, what we require is high energy X-rays. And for the first time, this country, which is China in its capital Beijing, has launched a particle accelerator. A particle accelerator which is named as High Energy Photon Source, HEPS. This is a groundbreaking technology discovered and developed by the China. This is the first Asian country to do so. And this HEPS will eventually be able to create the X-rays with the help of something which we call as synchrotron. Synchrotron. Because eventually, X-rays are the particles which are vibrated or charged at a very high energy level. In order to do that, you need them to have a resonating energy, a frequency of very, very high order, and you need to make them accustomed to that frequency again and again and again. This can only be done with the help of a synchrotron, where a particular particle is made to rotate in a high energy chambered circular loop again and again until it becomes energetic in order to produce the X-rays. In order to have a better understanding of the X-rays, we must also have understanding of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, because this is one of the basics. So first of all, we have got radio waves, microwaves, infrared, visible, ultraviolet, X-rays and gamma rays. You have to understand a few things about them, which is their increasing order of frequency or their decreasing order of wavelength. So first of all, you should know that frequency is always inversely proportional to wavelength. Wavelength, which is denoted by a lambda. And frequency is directly proportional to the energy. So higher the frequency of a particle, higher will be its energy, and lower will be its wavelength. So if I distinguish all these properties or all these different kind of electromagnetic spectrums in the terms of their frequencies, I will say that the frequency is increasing in this order, which means the one having least frequency is radio wave, naturally would be having the highest wavelength. Naturally will be having the highest wavelength, and the one having the highest energy, the gamma rays and the X-rays, they will be having the least wavelength. As you can see, the wavelength has also decreased. Then what about the energy? the most energetic particles will be able to emanate the X-rays and the gamma rays, and therefore from the black holes, from the magnetars, from the neutron stars, etc., you get the X-rays and the gamma rays and not the radio waves. Okay, but radio waves are something which very easily reach out to us. So anyway, talking about the wavelength, the radio waves are equivalent to that of a building, and talking about the X-rays, they are equivalent to that of the size of an atom. And therefore, we are going to work at a very atomic level, and therefore one atom, a particular atom is used and subjected to synchrotron in order to produce the X-rays. So I hope this concept is clear to you. Now in the examination, you might be asked what are synchrotrons and what are their applications. So synchrotrons are a kind of particle accelerators. In this particular case, the synchrotron is as large, with having a circumference of 36 kilometers. 36 kilometers worth circumference, in which a highly charged electron which will be subjected to the speed of light and will be made to rotate on and about the synchrotron over and over the time till it acquire a very high levels of energy. The levels of energy expected is about 6 giga electron volt. And when a particular particle or element is subjected to this high amount of energy, it produces something which we know as a synchrotron light. How would you imagine a synchrotron light? Something which is 10 billions times more brighter as compared to the light that you are receiving from the sun. So that is the amount of energy that is generated with the help of this synchrotron, which gives us very high levels of X-rays, which will help us to study across multiple applications. The most important thing is the X-ray particles are the one, the highly charged X-ray particles are the one which will not only help us to unveil the secrets of the universe, especially of the black holes, etc., but will also help us to have more deeper insights onto the particle physics and onto the biology as well, because X-rays are having size equivalent to an atom. So therefore, we can have a lot of atomic interventions. So now we will come to the applications. First of all, it will help us to develop a lot of materials. Therefore, the first application is in the material sciences. It will help us to have a lot of researches as to creating nanomaterials and even smaller materials, and also to analyze and assess multiple kinds of material at their atomic level. The second thing is in the chemistry. It will also help us to carry out a lot of chemical reactions at a very nanoscale. Very precise chemical reactions can be conducted and can be tracked with the help of the synchrotron light. The third is application in nanotechnology, where it can be helped to build a lot of technological solutions which can intervene at atomic level, very small levels, because that is what the wavelength of the synchrotron light is. Next is, it is of course helpful in creating a lot of biological interventions. For example, creating certain medical science instruments, or creating or having knowledge about certain biological structures, like we read in the AlphaFold 3. So it will help us to discover the biological molecules as well. And also, it will help us to discover about the environmental pollutants, the micro environmental pollutants, which anyway we are not able to predict and test with the help of the current technologies. That can also be done with the help of these technologies. So when you talk about the application, it doesn't just have a space application, but also applications across the different genres of subjects. But the point which I want you to remember is, it is the first time in Asia that a country has successfully conducted the HEPS experiment. Not that they are the only ones having the synchrotron. You will be very surprised to know that our India also has got indigenous synchrotrons that are very well worthy of creating such high energy X-ray particles. These are known as the Indus synchrotrons, and they are located in India. They are located actually at the Raja Ramanna Center of Atomic Research. Where is it located? Where is the RRCAT, Raja Ramanna Center for Atomic Research is located? It is located in Indore, which is in Madhya Pradesh. So we also have got our own synchrotrons in the name of Indus. Okay, so question can be asked, like how we read about Maitri and Bharti, etc. What are Maitri and Bharti, by the way? Just try to answer in the comment section. And also RRCAT, which is the Raja Ramanna Center located in Indore. It consists of Indus. Indus is the India's indigenous synchrotron. The next topic is a very interesting one, in which NASA is about to conduct a climate science mission in order to understand the amount of heat that is radiated out from the polar regions, that is from the Arctic region and the Antarctic region. For that, it will be deploying the CubeSat satellites. It will be deploying the satellites? Are they going to be geostationary satellites or the polar satellites? You tell me that. So the CubeSat satellites are going to be utilized by the NASA in order to understand the amount of polar radiant energy in the infrared, far infrared region or in the far infrared experiment. And therefore, this is known as a pre-fire mission. So this mission is by NASA, and this mission is basically to understand the climate changes that are taking place in the polar regions of the Earth. The reason for this is, you must have already heard, because of the global warming, Arctic amplification is going on, which means that the amount of heat absorbed by the Arctic, or the amount of warming that is there in the Arctic regions or in the Antarctic regions, is about 2 to 3 times higher as that compared to the rest part of the Earth, which is very surprisingly getting more insolation as compared to the polar regions. But still they are getting more warm. In order to understand, in order to have these polar cryogenic studies, NASA is going to deploy the pre-fire mission. Now, why are we calling it as infrared experiment? Because you must know that in the Earth, when the insolation comes, a lot of it, first of all, gets deflected from the upper parts of the atmosphere and from the albedo created by the snow caps and from the clouds. Now, some of the parts still, because being energetic enough, they penetrate inside the Earth. They penetrate inside the Earth's surface, and they, because they are so energetic, they are mostly having high energy, mostly having ultraviolet radiations. Ultraviolet radiations. Now, when they reach the Earth, they again try to reflect back. But when they reflect back, they are not as energetic as the energy that was coming from the sun. And that is why, because they are having lesser energy, they are having higher wavelength, which means they are infrared in nature. So the radiations out of the Earth are always in the IR category, in infrared category. In order to measure the radiations out from the polar systems or from the polar surfaces, we are having infrared detectors or infrared experiments. Now, if I talk about the solar radiation that you receive from the sun and the terrestrial radiation that we emit out towards the atmosphere, if I talk about the difference between both of them, at about closer to the tropics, near to the equator, it is surplus in nature, which means solar radiation is much more than the terrestrial radiation. But in the polar region, it is in deficit, which means solar radiation is very, very less as compared to the terrestrial radiations. So the primary causation of global warming or the amplified warming in the polar region is not the heat coming from the sun. It is because of the terrestrial radiation, that is moving out in the form of infrared waves. And now do you understand why are we conducting this infrared experiment? And now do you understand why Arctic amplification is primarily going on? Because of these radiations, because of these IR terrestrial radiations. Okay. Now, congratulations if you have come so far to the last topic of the science and tech discussion. In this, we will read about a very interesting type of viruses. They are known as virus. They are somewhere between bacteria and somewhere between viruses. And the fascinating news, because of which we are covering them, is 1.5 viruses dating back 1.5 billion years old have been rediscovered and have been found in the Yellowstone geothermal spring, which is situated in the Yellowstone Park, which is in USA. So the news is about the giant viruses, also known as gyruses. Let's quickly talk about their characteristic. It's not very, very important, but just having knowledge about their basic characteristics will help us to understand them better. First of all, they can live through a huge lifespan. As you can see that these bacteria, these viruses have actually been discovered and they were very, very old. 1.5 billion year old is something. So they are having that resilience against different kind of changes. So therefore, they have got a lot of evolutionary significance. In order to understand the evolution of life, the origin of life, in order to understand the nature of changing the characteristic shape and structure and the inheritance patterns, they are very important to be studied. So they are very important for evolutionary and biological significances. Talking about their size and structure, they are named as giant viruses. So of course, they are not going to be small in size like virus. They are of size, if I may tell in numbers, it is about 200 to 400 nanometers. It is about 400 to 200 nanometer, but please remember, some of them are even larger than bacteria, and therefore they show a lot of similarity with bacteria. Talking about their genetic material, they have got a very resilient genetic material. As you can see, it was so resilient, it lasted up to billion of years. So therefore, the genome complexity is where their data or their DNA and RNA is stored, has been complex and has been preserved very well. So just like the viruses, their genetic material is stored inside a very resilient protein, which is known as the capsid, which is again stored by some of the lipid coatings. So they show a lot of similarity with the bacteria in terms of shape, but in the terms of resilience, in terms of genetic resilience, they show similarities with viruses. Now, there are multiple types of diversity. In fact, they are so diverse in nature, they can infect basic materials, basic cellular organisms like a eukaryote, but also infect the largest of the aquatic organisms, the terrestrial organisms, and whatnot. So, because of huge diversity, some of the very famous viruses are the Pandora virus, the Mimi virus. And because of the diversity, they have a very prevailing ecological impact. They can infect across the diversity, from the avian biology to terrestrial one to aquatic one, everybody. In fact, it can infect from the smallest eukaryotes to the largest of the ecosystem organisms. And therefore, they hold a lot of evolutionary significance. Why? Because first of all, very, very prevalent, but also some of them can be dated back to billion of years. So this is all about the discussion of Recitals magazine from the month of May. I hope you have enjoyed it. Have a nice day.